All right, everybody. We are going to get started in just about 1 minute here with fundraising the smart way and the 5 new stages of getting major gifts faster, cheaper, and easier. So I hinted to you in the previous session that you should really attend this session if you want to be a better manager of fundraising processes in your organization, whether that is in your job description or not. And if you're looking for work right now, this may be useful to you. And if you're currently in an organization that's not getting as many major gifts as you'd like, this session can be incredibly illuminating for you. When I first talked with Ellen a couple of years ago now, I was simply blown away by the quality of both her writing and her ideas that were just simply so revolutionary as far as I'd ever heard anything about major gifts or tracking or basically how to manage your fundraising team and be a better manager of that team because I've never been managed myself. So Ellen has written a couple of books. Actually, we're going to start now. She's written a couple of books on how to do this. And so one of them is called Fundraising the Smart Way, as you can see here. And another one is called The Leaky Bucket. And she wrote that in conjunction with Linda Lysikowski, who's another fundraising veteran, and she's excellent. So Ellen, thank you so much for being here today. Again, I really appreciate it. I'm really excited about your presentation.
Thanks, Mazarine. I had a ball last year, so I would have been sorry not to be here this year. So, is it my turn now?
It totally is your turn, yep.
Okay, folks. Well, you'll learn more about my background as I move along through this. And if you want an exhaustive background, go see the interview Mazarine did with me earlier this past month. But we want to talk today about getting major gifts. Now, before anybody hangs up because you don't do major gift fundraising, what I mean by a major gift is any kind of contribution that's larger than the average small gift under $500 or $2,500 or whatever you consider a modest or small contribution to be. So we're talking about major gifts, major corporate sponsorships, and even major grants in this model of the 5 stages. And all my work is based on a kind of simple-minded idea. My big idea, get the beginning right and the end will take care of itself. And this idea seems blindingly obvious when you look at the words on the page, but in fact, we don't do that in our everyday fundraising lives. So I want to talk about what happens when you and your members of your fundraising team, your nonprofit staff, your board members, your program folks are sitting around griping about the fact that you don't have enough money, which is a pretty familiar experience for most nonprofit organizations. And somebody will come up with this bright idea. Yoo-hoo, let's raise major gifts. Isn't that cool? Because I heard from somebody who told somebody else that a friend of theirs asked for a multi-zillion-dollar gift and got it in a 5-minute phone call. Well, isn't that nice? Now that you've had that idea, what's the next step? And here's the thing. What's important here isn't my asking this obvious question. It's why you might not know what the next step is. When Mazarine kindly introduced me a moment ago, she talked about the first book that I wrote with my co-author, Linda Lysikowski, called The Leaky Bucket: What's Wrong with Your Fundraising and How You Can Fix It. That book was based on a survey we've been doing, an assessment we've been doing at Bristol Strategy Group ever since 2011. And at this point, we have over 1,400 responses. The Leaky Bucket assessment measures 9 business practices performed by fundraising staff. By the way, none of this has anything to do with how donors behave. There's a lot of research on donor behavior, donor performance, when donors give, when they don't give, what kinds of mechanisms they prefer to give on, and so on and so forth. But the things that tend to hold us back from getting larger contributions, larger chunks of income, refer to these problems. The Leaky Bucket assessment tells us that of the 1,400 or so nonprofits that have been through this assessment, they don't have standard criteria, including funder capacity and funder motivation for giving. In fact, 18% of them have no criteria. They say, we know who to go after, or we just try hard. And another 66%, so what does that add up to? That adds up to 84% of our population that has no documented criteria, stuff that you can measure against to tell you if a prospect has an interest in supporting your mission, or the money to, the capacity to support your mission at the major level. So you don't want to spend hours, which cost a lot of money, to get a $100 check from a highly philanthropic person who's committed all their philanthropic giving elsewhere. A modest number of our sector look for donors who have the right wealth profile, but if that is, how much money and have they given in the past and how much. But as you see here, only 6% of us are looking at wealth profile plus giving motivations, giving values, philanthropic charity, philanthropic philosophy, and so on and so forth. So to begin with, it might be tough to raise major gifts unless you know which candidates for major gifts justify the investment of your time. For example, we don't want a $25,000 annual budget organization pursuing a federal grant for $2 million, right? They can't use the money. A second problem in the Leaky Bucket is standards for acquiring new funders. And by the way, standards for retaining current funders, again, are thin on the ground. 68% of our respondents said they either just try hard or they kind of sort of think they ought to do it, they prefer to do it, but they don't have anything holding their feet to the fire of making sure certain levels of acquisition are achieved. As I said, the levels of retention, having specific performance expectations, that means metrics or numbers or targets, are even worse in retention. And when it comes to measurement, the picture is very troublesome. So good performance metrics, many of you have heard the term KPI. That means key performance indicators. Well, the geeks, unfortunately I'm one of them, who really pay attention to performance management have come to inform us that what the early indicators are more important predictors of success than the trailing or lagging or late stage indicators. But as you see here, overall the picture's pretty terrible. a very small percentage, 15% of the marketplace doesn't measure anything. A quarter of the marketplace does measure some of the leading indicators, like how many proposals or grant applications you write or present. And a tiny proportion keeps track of another early stage indicator, how often you meet with funders, especially when those meetings are not to ask for money. They're more in the realm of stewardship and updating. And I don't mean to contradict myself, but the largest proportions here are trailing indicators. You can't count up the amount of money you raised until after the process of raising it is complete. That is a trailing, or sometimes called lagging, indicator. It's good to know how much money you raised, but it kind of doesn't, you don't know soon enough to correct what you were doing earlier. The other part about this that upsets me is it suggests that 66% of nonprofits don't have an income goal in the first place, because only 66% are measuring their income against a documented income target. So what we're saying here is it's really hard to raise major gifts if you don't have a profile to decide whether philanthropist A, corporation B, or foundation C is right for you to invest your effort in. You don't know how many of them you need to acquire or retain, and you don't have a good way to measure your whole fundraising process. In other words, you have set yourself up to shoot yourself in the foot.
Yeah, and like that's true for so many of us, Ellen. I mean, so many of us don't get managed. We don't have any indicators for every single month. Are we hitting our goals? And, you know, some of you are like, oh no, Mazarine, don't give me something new for my boss to yell at me about. But, you know, if we're looking at our pipeline of what is coming in, then at the end of the year, it's not going to be a big surprise. You know?
Well, exactly. And
right?
I'm glad you intervened here, because I hate to just lecture people in a disembodied way. What I would honestly say to you, if you're listening and you are a fundraising professional, or you're a leader who doesn't have a fundraising staff, go ahead and set up your own performance targets. Go ahead and set up your own qualifying criteria. But if you're a leader and you manage any members of your staff, including volunteers, take the time to do this stuff. It takes less time than you think, and it reduces your cost of wasted time and effort dramatically once you've done it. So I want to talk about the concept of the pipeline. And first, let's talk about why you need one. Well, second, we'll talk about why you need one. First, let me talk about what is a pipeline. This is a concept that's in almost universal use in every sales organization all over the planet. And it's a real simple concept. All it is a checklist. There are a lot of ways to make this checklist fancy technology, or a spreadsheet, or something you put on a whiteboard, it doesn't matter. But all it is a list of all your current, active, unsecured opportunities. All the solicitations you've begun with current donors and new donor prospects, all the cultivation and relationship building you've done to get sponsorships, all the grant opportunities that you've inquired about and begun the application process for. All those things need to be in a list somewhere. The second piece, which is going to get us to the 5 easy stages, is that Pipelines are divided into artificial stages that tell you the very beginning of the stage is hello, the very end of the stage is here's my check, and there are some logical stages in between that tell you you're getting closer to a decision. We prefer the decision is yes. We have to be prepared for the decision to say no. And P.S., we have to be gracious whether it is yes or no. You may only go into your private room and throw darts at the prospect's face privately. So we're going to go back to why you need such a pipeline. First of all, I don't know about you, but once I get more than 2 or 3 opportunities into my company, I lose track of who's supposed to do what, to whom, when. And it's super duper easy to forget what who's on first, so to speak. So if you don't have some kind of pipeline instrument, spreadsheet will almost do the job for you. It's not the best solution, but it's a decent one. Then you are going to be confused. And confusion gives way to wasted effort and to something even more horrible, a live, interested prospect who you forget about, and then they lose interest. So you don't want that to happen. I want to explain this this image to you. We developed a pipeline model we call donor moves. If you've ever heard of moves management, that's why we call it donor moves. It's like moves management generation 10, okay? And I'm mentioning this because most ways that we measure pipeline progress, tend to measure our activities. Did you make a phone call? Did you schedule an appointment? Did you schedule a facility tour? Did you give a demonstration? Did you introduce a client testimonial? Did you sing the university fight song, buy them lunch, give them a challah on the Sabbath, whatever. So we said, that's too complicated. What if we measured instead whether or not the donor has taken actions that tell us they're getting closer to yes or to no? So we simplified it by saying the donor tells us about their reasons for giving. We have to be clever enough to ask the right questions. But if they share our reasons to give, they have achieved the first of the donor moves. And in the second move, they become able to see your value or validate that what you say is so. And in the third move, they tell you they're willing to consider making a gift or a grant or a sponsorship. In the fourth move, they negotiate the details. All of these are shorthand for a much larger description of how they behave. But in move 4, the major donor or a major funder will sit down with you to negotiate the terms or the scope of your proposal or recommendation or application. And in move 5, they make the investment. I always say move 5 is they make the investment, because if you're going to lose them, you're going to lose them at move 3 or move 4, or maybe even at move 2. These other things, 6, 7, and 8, are great stewardship moves. What we want to talk about today is moves 1 through 5. So I'm going to break this lovely diagram into what it really feels like when you're interacting with your funding prospects. You learn, this is something we teach our clients, how to ask a certain kind of question, or certain set of questions. We call them suggested probing questions, and none of them can be answered with a yes or a no. So they really kind of influence the funder to talk about themselves. So they end up telling you about how they became philanthropic and what causes are really motivating to them and what's important to them, and so on and so forth, which means you get to decide if they are, please pardon me, this sounds elitist, are these guys good enough for you? In other words, not are they nice enough people, but does their potential for long-term giving justify the investment of your scarce and precious fundraising hours? P.S. You have a whole lot less hours than you think you do. And then in move 2, they want to validate whether or not you're blowing smoke or you really can do what you say you can do or intend to do what you say you can do. So that gives you a chance to describe your impact, your strengths, your results, what makes you interesting, how you do it differently or as well as somebody else in your sector, but you happen to be nearby and have free parking. In move 3, you get them to the point of saying, yes, they're willing to consider making a gift. Well, if they say yes, they're willing to consider making a gift, you better be prepared to offer a range of giving. Because oftentimes we've observed our clients get to the point where they say to their prospects, you sound like you'd be a really good partner for us or investor for us or whatever you want to call it. Would you be willing to consider investing in us or supporting us or making a donation or whatever you want to call it? And if the answer is going to be yes, the first question out of their minds is, how much did you have in mind? Rather than feeling like an idiot, you get to say, we were looking for a gift between X and Y. X is as low as you're comfortable asking for, and Y is higher than you're comfortable asking for. Because for some reason, if you give them a 3-part range, people tend to choose the middle. So you be prepared to offer a giving range, and then you prepare to write a proposal. In move 4, that's where you sit down and you say, funding prospect, what do you think of our proposal? Did it meet your expectations? Is it in the range of giving that makes sense for you? Are we on target here? And then your opportunity there is either to confirm or offer some leeway. Offer a payment schedule. Discuss the scope of the gift, the size of the gift, whatever it is. And when they say yes, which they will, that's when you open the champagne. So let me ask all of you to tell Mazarine if you follow this concept. Just click or say yeah or something.
Yeah, so put in the chat, Morgan said yes. Tracy said yes. Emily said yes. Adrienne said yes. Trish and Cynthia and Diane and the other Diane said yes. And Nina said, got it, yes.
Great. So in effect, this is your pipeline. These are your 5 easy stages. You're checking off whether or not you are able to persuade and influence a funding prospect to achieve certain interim results. Now, we have a poll here, which of course I skipped.
It's okay, I got it right here. I got it. What stage is most important to getting the gift? Is it stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, stage 4, or stage 5? So
We're really eager to get your input on this.
Yeah, what do you think? Is it if what they do or what you do?
Well, first of all, I want you to let me answer that for you even before you get. Of the 5 things they do, what stage is most important?
Excellent. So looking like we've got about 47% of people voted. A couple people have voted in the chat. Anyone else want to vote before we close this poll? And people are commenting too, which is really interesting.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. Okay, last chance, everybody, to vote. All right. I'm going to close the poll and share the results with you. So looks like most of us said stage 1. Share their motivations. Then a few people said stage 2, validate. One person said stage 3, and one person said stage 5. And then a few people here in the chat said 1. Kayla said, yes, I love the idea of donor moves with a fresh perspective on traditional fundraising. And then Emily said, building the relationship is important.
So the 72% of you who voted for stage 1 get the non-existent prize. I will not record my voice on your answering machine. What's really important here is you deciding whether or not this particular funder justifies further investment of your time. This is really a big difference, I think, in a kind of 50,000-foot overview of the philosophy of fundraising. All of us, and I include myself because I have been in the sales business since 1972. Okay, folks, I've been selling somebody else's goods and services or my own since for the last 40, whatever it is, shocking number of years. Yes, it's amazing. I have a wonderful walker to keep me going. What the point I want to make is we have always assumed that the issue is, are we going to be good enough for them? Are we going to be cool enough, cheap enough, expensive enough, glamorous enough, feature rich enough, cool enough, fill in the blank, for them to say that's the blouse or the software application I want, or the, whatever. Now, the Smart Way model flips it all inside out and says, I already know I'm good enough for you. The question is, are you good enough for me? Are you right for us? Do you really want to support our mission? Do you think our mission is worth putting a big chunk of your philanthropic money to work? Do you agree that we're approaching things with the correct values? Is the way we're doing it meaningful to you? Do you sense that we're capable of providing you with a level of support and recognition and stewardship that you're looking for, and so on and so forth? So, are you right for us is the major overriding question here. And I emphasize this because everybody knows that asking for money, even if you do it for a living, is very, very ego demanding. It's risky. It's really easy to get no and to experience a great deal of rejection and to get yelled at, and all kinds of terrible things can happen. And I've heard too many people in this profession, the fundraising profession, where we're called upon to be great psychologists, impeccable networkers, tireless consumers of rubber chicken, fundraising is a really, really difficult job, and you are out there in public on a tightrope with a constant threat of being turned down. So if you can sort of make the mental switcheroo and say, we're great, we believe in our mission is working, we have good results, it's their tough noogies if they don't want to give to us. We'll find people who do want to give to us. Can you imagine how refreshing that would be if you could kind of embrace that mentality amongst your board members and your fundraising staff and your program staff? Imagine being able to run an organization where you're not agonizing over whether or not you can afford to buy the next $300 refurbished laptop when you know you've got the money because you've got this level of confidence. So, any additional comments thus far, Mahzarin? Because I'd like to, if there aren't, I'd like to proceed and talk to you about something that I hope is already coming up in the back of your minds. And that is, how do you keep track of this stuff? I've already said over and over again that if you don't have a pipeline, the risk of confusion is very high. The risk of, how are you going to how are you going to manage a portfolio of opportunities that might only be 10 opportunities, but it might be 50 opportunities. I know of plenty of organizations where each member of the fundraising team has to manage over 100 donor relationships. Who remembers who's what's the difference between Maggie and Jigs, right? So I wanted to show you some of the things we believe in that can make this easier. And with your permission, I'm going to show you some screenshots of some software we put together. It's not to pitch you on our software, but just to show what, if you could gather the data, you could produce these kinds of graphs and charts that give you invaluable information. Now, as I said when I was showing you bucket, easy for me to say, start over. Back a few slides. When I showed you one of the leaky bucket results, we talked about kind of clumsy use of ways to measure fundraising progress. And I said that only 66% of our respondents measure their total income against a goal for income. It's something that every salesperson learns, not that they do such a great job of keeping track of it, but every salesperson and every fundraiser knows they're going to lose some of the deals that they've identified as really sure bets. Do you all agree? I'm sure you do. So what we recommend is that you establish a target for income. That's the two gold columns you see here, or the right-hand portion of each of the two columns. So we have a target, which is not really showing here, of $10 million of income. And currently, this hypothetical organization has raised $4.5 million. So they're a little behind 50% of their income production. We like to recommend establishing targets for how big your pipeline ought to be. So since virtually nobody has a baseline for how big their pipeline really needs to be, we say, hey, why not say you need to put 3 times as much opportunity in your pipeline as the amount of money you want to raise. So if you want to raise $10 million, please God you can, then you really need to have a pipeline that's always worth $30 million. And it has to have some multiplier of the number of opportunities in here, as well as the total monetary value of the opportunities. I think, Mazarine, you might be able to tell people why we want this 3 times multiplier.
Absolutely. Yeah. So when I first heard about this concept, this is what blew my mind about what Ellen teaches. Because I always just had people tell me, just do it. Just go raise money. Just go, and I'm like, okay, well, I guess I'll apply for all the grants that I can and write all the letters that I can and try to get all the sponsorships I can for these big events. And I hope it's enough. I hope I don't get fired. I hope I don't spend too much money because my budget was never approved either. Right. And so yeah. I just lived in fear of being fired and just trying to do everything I could. And it was really, really frustrating and anxiety inducing and nerve wracking for me. And so when I hear you talk about leading indicators instead of trailing indicators, this is what this is. This is when you look at, okay, great. Like
pipeline.
Right, this is our pipeline. Like you can ask 20 people or 30 people, let's just say 30 people for a $10,000 sponsorship. And hopefully, based on their giving history to us and other organizations, 10 of them will say yes. So 1 in 3 of them will give it to us.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's perfect. And another way I like to express this is by saying, if your pipeline is always 3 times larger than your income target, you can afford to lose $2 out of every 3 and still make your goal.
Right.
So that's a very good thing to make your goal. And the agony level just goes so much farther down. If your pipeline isn't big enough, it doesn't give you the capacity to raise the amount of money you're looking for. So here's another way to look at the pipeline. This is really a fancy schmancy software version of what is just a spreadsheet. Now, I could only share a piece of this, regrettably, because it's just too wide to fit on a slide. But over here, we can see when we started the project and how much we hoped the project would be. This section called Scorecard Rank tells us whether a prospect was highly qualified or poorly qualified, A, B, C, or G. And then over here, we just put a 1. This is what's called binary. They either did achieve the move, or as you see over here, they didn't achieve the move. And the point is, to some, we've all been told it's a relationship game. But we have to remember, it's also a numbers game. We can't do what Mazarine just described. We can't sit around and do nothing, and we can't throw a whole bunch of junk at the wall and hope some of it will stick. We have to say, gee, we need enough people in our pipeline moving through the donor moves at a regular pace to produce consistent, predictable income. Most people who have sold for a living will tell you they probably had a forecast meeting maybe as frequently once a week. I don't hear fundraising teams talk about forecasting. And I think that's a shame, because when you can have reasonably accurate, consistent forecasting, guess what happens? You can invest in staff, professional development, facilities, information technology, and cash reserves. When you don't have a budget, you don't know how much you want to earn, and you don't know how likely you are to earn it, your board and probably senior staff are going to sit on whatever money's in the kitty and spend only the least possible to pay for program and service delivery. So we all know that that's not a very effective way to run a business. We all know we have to spend money to make money. We all know we have to pay people a competitive staff. We should live so long. We already know we need to be investing in plant and equipment, as it's referred to in the corporate sector, in marketing, in outreach, in stewardship, in client service delivery. So if we can't tell whether or not we're making progress bringing in big gifts and keeping track of our small gifts, by the way, we're in much bigger trouble than we had hoped for. So we're getting to the point where we're going to kind of go over a few last minute issues here. And I'm really hoping that there have been enough ideas for you to take away. So the first one when you're doing major gift work is this. If you're going to lose either the funder altogether or a particular gift for a particular purpose or a particular campaign, you want to lose it early. You don't want to spend dozens of hours courting a funding source without knowing whether or not they are willing to consider a gift and have the capacity and motivation for giving or not. So this is where the emphasis on relationship building kind of crumbles if the relationship isn't driving toward a particular purpose. Between you and me, folks, those who make major contributions to nonprofits, and I include foundations and corporate sponsorships, as well as major philanthropic gifts, they know you are asking for money somewhere, sometime. And many's the time, those of us in the profession will have heard, why didn't you just tell me how much you wanted? Why didn't you ask for more? You asked me for $500, I gave you $500, but had you explained that I could put my name on your operating room, I would have given you $5 million. I'm exaggerating. Mm-hmm. The second thing is, your fundraising team always has to be seeking the next donor move. In fact, when we're training companies, nonprofit organizations in this model, during the implementation support period, we give them assignments. We meet with them every second, twice a month. We say, okay, between this meeting and the next meeting, how many donor moves are you going to assign yourselves? And that can include a number of moves for individual gift opportunities, or many different moves among many opportunities. But the point is, you don't need to spend 73 hours after you've gotten to know somebody and discovered they met your ideal donor profile, not doing anything else except reinforcing your friendship and buying them lunch. And the third thing is to always keep your pipeline at 3 times income target. I want to elaborate on that just a moment. Theoretically, or by history, we tend to exhaust our gift opportunities at the end of the year, don't we? During the winter holidays. That's the big fundraising time. So there's 2 points at which we want to sort of squeeze the purse dry, so to speak, during the holidays and at the end of your fiscal year. The problem then is you end up prematurely pushing a whole bunch of stuff through the pipeline and out the other end into the actual column. So you start the year with a need to start from scratch. What that means is it's going to take you several months just to break even. And this has to do with retention. You need to say, every time a funder makes a gift, I want to put that funder back into my pipeline for another gift next year or even sooner. So if it's the gift to the annual appeal, why don't we go back to that funder for a special campaign, a naming opportunity, a scholarship, a contribution to, I don't know, a caseload of Mickey Mouse ears for all the children, something. You guys can come up with stuff. So if you don't retain your donors and you don't have your pipeline at 3 times income target on the 364th day of your fiscal year, it takes a lot longer to break even. And for those of you who may not be familiar with the concept of the break-even analysis, pretty simple to explain. Break-even means you're making enough money to pay your expenses. You're neither losing money nor putting money in cash reserves, PS, also known as profit. And the longer you don't have people to ask for another gift, or don't have people who are in the process of cultivation, and somewhere around move 2 or move 3 or even move 4 on day 364, the longer you're going to be climbing back up the hill to break even. So you need to assign retention targets. A critical element here is recognizing that anytime you've already qualified a funding source according to your ideal profiles, you already know they share your values and they have the right philanthropic motivations and capacity. So getting a second gift out of them doesn't start all over at move 1. It starts all over at move 3. Are they willing to consider making another gift? So this whole model really addresses the productivity of your fundraising team, and it's delivered in a set of management practices that are relatively simple to, to define. Excuse me there, I have a tendency to talk too long without taking a sip. They're relatively simple to define. Once you've defined them and put them in place, everybody needs a little hand-holding for a while because you're going to fall back to old habits unless they're reinforced by practice. But once they become a habit, or as some people say, part of the organizational DNA, great management costs nothing. Bad management is expensive, and no management at all is disastrous. So my key issue for you folks is it's not just how you do fundraising. I'm sure there are people on this webinar who can run rings around both Mazarine and myself when it comes to writing grant applications, cultivating individual donors, and negotiating terms with corporate sponsors. That's the doing part. The big difference between struggling along and jumping into superior performance is how you manage your fundraising efforts. So this is all part of the fundraising the smart way model. I just didn't have enough room for the official title there. You're going to improve fundraising retention rates, which means more income, less effort, faster attainment of annual break-even point. You're going to improve your funder acquisition rates. If anybody on your board says, just focus on retention, don't listen to them. Ditto, if anybody on your board says, just focus on acquisition, say yes, dear, and don't listen to them. You have to be able to forecast income growth accurately. If you want a board who adores you, be able to do that. Raise enough money to cope with the unexpected. Unexpected includes disasters like, God forbid, another Katrina or Florence. But it also means unexpected opportunities. Suddenly, the perfect employee is available, but you have to have more money than you wanted to spend. Or a phenomenal new opportunity to open a branch in another geography, or invest in software, or. You also have to, the unexpected also includes not just disaster, but unanticipated funding cuts. How many of you have awakened to a surprise from your government grant saying, oh, guess what, we're cutting you back by 10, 50, 80%. Oops. And you want to have the ability to retain your best employees because at the moment, turnover runs not at 18 months on average, but at 16 months on average. And the cost of replacing those employees range from a low of about 1.5 times the employee's salary to about 9 times the employee's salary without taking into account cost of lost opportunity, onboarding, and ramp up. So let's open this for questions, comments, and if you have additional questions you don't want to share, email me or call me.
Yes, thank you so much, Ellen. We do have some questions here.
Cool.
So I just want to say thank you for what you shared today. For me, I have been learning a lot, and I knew what you were going to present already. And I feel like one of the key takeaways that I'm hearing just for me is the idea of forecasting meetings once a week with everybody to get a sense of, okay, where are we? Are we hitting our new donor targets? Are we keeping our donor targets? Like, if you have the right software to show you how many we're keeping or how many we're bringing in, that can be useful to you.
Well,
if right?
Let me just comment.
Mm-hmm.
Between you and me and the Gatepost, major gift fundraising doesn't progress quickly enough to justify a weekly meeting. Although you might want to have one in the early stages of adopting a model like this, but we're all meeting to death. So once you really get comfortable with this whole concept, a monthly meeting is great. That's plenty of time to get early warnings about where your pipeline encounters an obstacle or a bottleneck, and to discuss what you can do if everybody is stuck at move 3 willing to consider making a gift, but they haven't gotten to move 4, negotiate terms and scope.
Right.
So thanks, Mazarine, and thank you for the lead-in to talk about how often you ought to review your progress with your team.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, thanks for teaching us about the concept of the pipeline and the leading instead of trailing indicators. Jessica asked, what if your org does not have the staff to follow up with that many prospects?
You can, let's start out here. Every organization has to scale this approach to what's tolerable. Now, I'm about to depart from a kind of knee-jerk reaction I've had for many years, which is you need staff and you can't rely on your board. But a colleague because it's very hard to get the board development committee to really salute and do the work that's necessary. But I'm beginning to understand, thanks to a very talented colleague of mine, her name is Beth Hirschenhart, and Mazarine, we ought to get her in on a future Nonprofit Leadership Summit. She likes to interview board members and volunteers to look for the person she calls the spark plug. Somebody or some group of somebodies who's really so enthusiastic about the organization and its mission and programs and everything that they'll actually roll up their sleeves and do the work.
Right.
So Jessica, you may have some spark plugs within your constituency to help you raise those portfolios from maybe today you can only manage, staff can only manage 5 or 6 gift opportunities at any given point. That's fine, build your targets around that. But think about how you can find somebody else to volunteer to open doors or to steward donors who are at the modest level and might be candidates to get to the immodest level. I don't know what to call it, right? So I hope that's a useful thought, because
she said yes. Yes, thank you. That's a great answer. Bob said, thank you, good stuff. A reminder to have a roadmap to major gifts and now how to get there efficiently rather than just get in the car eventually and maybe end up at our destination.
There you go.
Yeah.
Thanks, Bob. Perfect. You know, if you don't have a destination, any route will get you there. So,
right.
Great.
It's very much like Alice in Wonderland says. If you don't know where you're going, if you don't care where you're going, it doesn't matter how you get there.
Exactly.
So Justin asked, do you recommend that current major donors receive direct mail, or should they be removed from direct mail? If they're included, how do these 5 steps play into that?
Okay, that's a nice description of a set of tactics which can either retard progress in the along the strategic performance indicators of the donor moves model, or accelerate it. The key about your major donors isn't whether or not they should get email from you. Of course they should get, they have to get communications from you. I did some research, now I can't remember where it was. It said one of the prime reasons donors opt out of continuing to give is lack of communication. So every major donor should receive most of your outreach emails. A good practice is to set up a special communication just for major donors. Don't call it the major donor newsletter. I don't know what to suggest.
Circle of Hope Lifeline or whatever.
Yeah. And the other thing is those donors are, they give because we ask them, but they also want to know how is the money being used. So you get to say, thanks to donors like you, we were able this year to do something special or extraordinary. So I like to think of a schedule of email and social media outreach that goes to everybody, a schedule of email and social media outreach that goes to the few, and a schedule of direct interaction that is called stewardship, where every major donor gets at least one face-to-face, if possible, or Zoom, screen sharing meeting at the very least, at least once a year to talk about your progress, their thought process, and not to ask for a gift. Just How's it going? We did this. What do you think about it? We're considering doing that. What do you think about it? Do you have any advice for fill in the blank? And, I want to wish the dog a happy bar mitzvah. Whatever it is. Every donor, no matter how modest, including the $5 donor, or the kid who sends you 25 quarters taped to a piece of cardboard, gets a phone call from somebody on the board or a volunteer every year, and gets a thank you note every year. But those major donors justify deeper investment in thanks, reports, and relationships. I hope that was helpful.
It sounds helpful to me. Jeez, that sounds incredible. Another person asked a question which I feel like you just answered, but I want to ask them if that feels like true for them. This person said, "How do we establish a donor base? Mailed out hundreds of requests for donations and did not get one reply." And it feels like what you said just now kind of answers that.
Well, there's another answer I want to add to it.
Yeah.
If you have an organization that has been in existence more than a week, you have some stakeholders. You have the friends of the family money and your board and a few people who have received services. So this is where networking skills come to play. You got to sit down and talk with stakeholders and ask them some of these suggested probing questions. What is it about our organization that you think would be attractive to funders? What do we do well? There's a whole exercise that it's like a modified SWOT analysis. I don't mean to be too technical here, but a SWOT analysis is a simple strategic planning exercise. S stands for strengths, W stands for weaknesses, O stands for opportunities, T stands for threats. And really what you're all only trying to do is sit around the table with a bunch of your stakeholders and say, what are our strengths and what are our weaknesses? We do good at this, we're lousy at that. We have a great CEO is overworked, blah, blah, blah. And then you throw away the weaknesses and just ask yourselves, let's just focus on our strengths. And now let's ask ourselves, of our strengths, which of those strengths is most persuasive, I use that term deliberately, to prospective funders? Then you got to go out and talk to people who might be candidates, colleagues or friends of your board members, family members of your service clients, anybody else you can tie to a chair long enough to have this conversation. When I hear from organizations like yours who tell us, we sent out 20 million letters and phone calls and we hired the Goodyear blimp and all that stuff, and we've gotten no money, the first question we have to ask is, what message are you sending? Because if the message is, we need money, the answer is, you and what other army, followed by, I don't care.
Right. Yeah. You can't just have that be the message, quite honestly. Thank you for that, Ellen. I know we're a little over time now, so I wanted to pause. But we did have one helpful comment from a person named Bob who said, "We send an annual investment report to donors along with a general quarterly newsletter to all our donors. Because we recognize that they are investing in our organization, the clients and the community at large, I also send a personal letter of thank you after every donation." And that, he said, improves their retention rates and their list grows every year.
You're hired, Bob.
Yeah, Bob, you're totally hired.
You're a rock. Great. Well, thanks everybody so much.
Oh, thank you, Ellen. People are saying thank you in the chat, and very much appreciating you. Emily and Bob said thank you, and I'm going to. Adrienne said thanks so much. I love that. I'm gonna share my screen again just to tell everybody that our next session is going to start in just about 20-ish minutes.